Chapter 1. The Forgotten Hero. The twin moons of Theron, 5 hung low in the crimson sky, their pale light casting long shadows over the dusty expanse of the Ardent Horizon outpost. For Captain Marcus Hayes, the isolated human soldier stationed here, the outpost was as close to purgatory as one could get. The air was dry and thin, the heat oppressive, and the company, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly the kind you'd invite over for dinner. The outpost served as a temporary sanctuary for displaced aliens, refugees from countless conflicts across the galaxy. It was a melting pot of species and cultures, though melting pot implied some semblance of harmony. Here, survival took precedence over diplomacy, and everyone had their secrets. Marcus had been stationed at the outpost for nearly a year, sent there after a series of political mishaps had made him more of a liability than a hero. His stellar record in the Terran Defense Corps meant little after he had openly defied orders to protect civilians during a controversial mission. His reassignment to this backwater post had been a punishment disguised as a new opportunity. Yet, even in exile, Marcus couldn't ignore his instincts. And those instincts were what drew his attention to Vishari, the silent, paralyzed alien warrior who lived in the shadows of the outpost. The warrior's isolation. Vishari was a Karani, a species known for their towering stature, shimmering scales, and unmatched combat prowess. Her reputation as a warrior had reached even Marcus's ears before he arrived. She had once been a commander, feared and respected across the galaxy. But now, she was a ghost of her former self, crippled from the waist down and abandoned by her people. The Karani were a proud and ruthless species. In their culture, weakness was unforgivable, and those who couldn't fight were deemed expendable. Vishari's paralysis had made her a pariah, left to rot on a distant outpost where no one would care if she lived or died. She lived in a small, decrepit corner of the outpost, far from the main hub. Her wheelchair was cobbled together from salvaged parts, a crude assembly that barely functioned. The other inhabitants of the outpost either ignored her or mocked her openly, their disdain for the once mighty warrior evident in every sneer and whispered remark. Marcus couldn't stand it. He had first noticed her during one of his patrols, her silhouette slumped in the shadows of a dilapidated shelter. She rarely spoke, her gaze distant, as if she were lost in a world of her own. But her presence lingered in his mind, a constant reminder of the unfairness of it all. One evening, as Marcus was making his rounds, he came across a group of aliens harassing her. They were a motley crew: a reptilian Marnock, a wiry Osirian, and a hulking Draxeral, laughing as they pushed her wheelchair back and forth, taunting her with cruel remarks. "You were supposed to be unstoppable, Vishari. Look at you now. Can't even defend yourself anymore, can you?" Marcus's blood boiled. Before he could stop himself, he stepped into the fray, his voice cutting through the laughter like a blade. "That's enough." The trio turned to face him, their expressions shifting from amusement to irritation. The Marnock sneered, his scaled lips curling back to reveal sharp teeth. "What's it to you, human?" Marcus didn't flinch. "Walk away. Now." The Draxer growled, taking a step forward. "You think you can order us around? This isn't your outpost." "No," Marcus said calmly, his hand resting on the hilt of his sidearm. "But it's under my protection. And that means her, too." For a moment, the air was thick with tension. Then, the Osirian laughed nervously, tugging at his companions. "Forget it. She's not worth the trouble." The trio slinked away, leaving Marcus alone with Vishari. She didn't say a word, her gaze fixed on the ground. Marcus crouched beside her, his voice soft. "Are you all right?" Her response was curt. "I don't need your pity." "It's not pity," Marcus said. "It's decency." Vishari's piercing violet eyes met his for the first time, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of something gratitude, perhaps, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Without another word, she wheeled herself away, leaving Marcus standing alone in the fading light. A decision to act. The encounter haunted Marcus. He had always believed in standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves, and Vishari's plight gnawed at his conscience. Over the next few days, he began leaving supplies near her shelter: extra rations, medical kits, and even a new power cell for her wheelchair. She never acknowledged them, but he noticed that the items always disappeared by morning. One evening, as he was finishing his patrol, he found her waiting for him. Her expression was unreadable, her hands resting on the armrests of her wheelchair. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice low and guarded. Marcus hesitated, then shrugged. "Because no one else will." Her gaze was sharp, almost accusatory. "Do you think this makes you a hero? Helping the broken alien?" "No," Marcus said honestly, "but it makes me human." For the first time, Vishari's stoic facade cracked. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she looked away. "You're wasting your time." "Maybe," Marcus admitted, "but I don't think so." The outpost's warning. Word of Marcus's actions spread quickly through the outpost, and not everyone was pleased. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Reeve, summoned him to the command center. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Hayes?" Reeve demanded, slamming a datapad onto the desk. "You've been drawing attention to yourself, and that's the last thing we need out here." "I'm just helping someone who needs it," Marcus said evenly. Reeve leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "That someone is a liability. Do you know who she is? What she's done?" "I know enough," Marcus replied. "And I don't care." Reeve's tone turned icy. "Then you're an idiot. The Kirani want her dead. If they find out she's still alive, they'll come here, and they won't stop until they wipe this place off the map." Marcus stiffened. "So we're just supposed to let her rot? Is that it?" "That's exactly it," Reeve snapped. "And if you don't like it, I suggest you keep your head down. Otherwise, you'll end up just like her." Marcus left the command center, his jaw clenched. Reeve's words echoed in his mind, but they only strengthened his resolve. Vishari had been abandoned by everyone, her people, her comrades, and now the outpost that was supposed to offer sanctuary. Marcus refused to be another name on that list. The first step. That night, Marcus found Vishari sitting outside her shelter, staring up at the twin moons. He approached cautiously, unsure if she would welcome his presence. "Reeve's not happy with me," he said, breaking the silence. "Why am I not surprised?" Vishari replied dryly. Marcus sat down beside her, the cool night air washing over them. "He said your people want you dead. Is that true?" Vishari didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was betrayed, left for dead when I could no longer fight. To them, I'm a reminder of their failure, of their weakness." Marcus frowned. "Then they don't deserve you." She turned to him, her violet eyes shimmering with unspoken emotion. "Why are you doing this, Marcus? Why do you care?" He met her gaze, his voice steady. "Because I've been where you are. Cast aside. Forgotten. And I know what it's like to wish anyone would just care." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, to his surprise, Vishari smiled faintly. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was enough to give Marcus hope. Chapter 2. The Warriors Passed. The outpost had settled into an uneasy quiet by the next morning, the desert heat radiating off the rusted walls. Marcus Hayes walked through the makeshift corridors, heading toward the small corner where Vishari lived in solitude. The tension from the night before lingered in his mind. Reeve's warning, the growing discontent of the other refugees, and the weight of his own defiance. When Marcus arrived, he found Vishari sitting near her shelter, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Her wheelchair, though crude, was motionless, the power cell he had provided still holding up. The faint shimmer of her scales caught the light, a stark contrast to the hardened lines of her face. "You're up early," Marcus said, approaching her with a cautious smile. "I don't sleep much," Vishari replied without looking at him. Her voice was softer today, though still guarded. "The dreams. They don't let me." Marcus hesitated, then sat down on the ground beside her. "Dreams about what?" For a long moment, she didn't respond. Then, with a deep sigh, she spoke. "The nearest line. That's where it all ended for me." The nearest line. Marcus listened intently as Vishari recounted the events of that fateful battle. The nearest line was a critical stronghold in the war between her people, the Kirani, and the invading Zorth collective. A brutal conflict that had lasted decades. The nearest line was supposed to be an impenetrable defense, a testament to Kirani engineering and strategy. Vishari had commanded an elite unit known as the Skyfong Division. Their mission was to hold the line at all costs, ensuring the evacuation of civilians from nearby systems. The odds had been stacked against them from the start, But Vishari had believed in her soldiers, in their ability to overcome anything. "We fought for days," she said, her voice distant. "Wave after wave of Zorith soldiers. Their weapons tore through our defenses like they were nothing. But we held. Every step they took, we pushed them back." She paused, her hands tightening on the armrests of her chair. "Until we couldn't anymore. The enemy unleashed their abominations, bioengineered monstrosities. They overwhelmed us. And when I was struck down, when I couldn't stand anymore, my commanders made their decision. They left you," Marcus said softly, his jaw tightening. "They called it a tactical withdrawal." Vishari spat, bitterness dripping from her words. "But I know the truth. They left because I was no longer useful, because I was broken. And in the eyes of the Karani, the broken are disposable." The cost of honor. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "That's why you're here. They didn't just abandon you, they wanted to erase you." Vishari nodded, her gaze distant. "I was found by scavengers days later, half dead and paralyzed. They brought me here, hoping to sell me to the highest bidder. When no one wanted me, they left me behind." Her voice broke slightly, and Marcus saw the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. For all her strength, all her resilience, she was still haunted by the betrayal of her own people. "You didn't deserve that," Marcus said firmly. "None of it." She turned to him, her violet eyes shimmering with unspoken emotion. "You don't know what I've done, human. The lives I've taken. The blood on my hands. Maybe they were right to leave me." "No," Marcus said, his voice resolute. "You fought to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. You sacrificed everything for them. That's not something to be ashamed of." For the first time, Vishari's hardened expression softened. She didn't speak, but the gratitude in her eyes was clear. The bounty. Their fragile moment of connection was interrupted by a loud commotion from the outpost's main gate. Marcus stood quickly, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol holstered at his side. "Stay here," he said to Vishari before heading toward the noise. When he reached the gate, he found a group of heavily armed mercenaries standing just outside. Their leader, a hulking Zorathian with metallic implants lining his arms, stepped forward. His voice was deep and guttural. "We're looking for someone," the Zorathian said, holding up a holographic display. The image that flickered to life was unmistakable, was Vishari. Marcus felt his stomach drop. "What do you want with her?" The mercenary sneered. "She's got a bounty on her head, dead or alive, but preferably dead. Hand her over, and we'll leave peacefully." "And if we don't?" Marcus asked, his tone icy. The Zorathian's smile widened, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "Then we'll take her by force, and anyone who gets in our way." A fateful decision. Marcus returned to Vishari's shelter, his mind racing. She looked up at him as he approached, her expression immediately turning serious. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Mercenaries," Marcus said grimly. "They're here for you." Vishari's jaw tightened. "Then let them come. I won't let them take me alive." "You don't have to do this alone," Marcus said, kneeling beside her. "We can fight them together." "No," Vishari said firmly. "You don't understand. If you help me, they'll come after you, too. This isn't your fight." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze steady. "It is now. I'm not leaving you to face this alone." For a moment, Vishari seemed at a loss for words. Then she nodded, a faint smile breaking through her stoic demeanor. "You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both," Marcus said with a grin. "Now, let's figure out how to deal with these guys." Preparing for battle. The outpost wasn't equipped to handle a large-scale assault, but Marcus knew they couldn't just hand Vishari over. He began rallying the other refugees, convincing them to stand against the mercenaries. Though many were hesitant, his passion and determination inspired a few to join the fight. Meanwhile, Vishari used her knowledge of tactics to help Marcus devise a plan. Despite her physical limitations, her mind was as sharp as ever, and her insight proved invaluable. "They'll attack from the east," she said, studying a crude map of the outpost. "That's the weakest point in the defenses. If we can funnel them into the central corridor, we'll have the advantage." "Got it," Marcus said. "Let's make it happen." As night fell, the outpost prepared for the inevitable attack. Barricades were erected, weapons distributed, and trap set. Marcus stood beside Vishari, who had positioned herself near the command center. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. Vishari nodded, her violet eyes blazing with determination. "I've spent too long running from my past. It's time to face it." The first strike. The mercenaries attacked at dawn, their forces swarming the outpost's eastern gate. Plasma bolts lit up the sky as the defenders held their ground, using the narrow corridors to their advantage. Marcus fought on the front lines, his rifle blazing as he took down one enemy after another. From her position in the command center, Vishari coordinated the defense, her voice calm and authoritative. "Pull back to the second barricade. Hold the line." The battle was fierce, but the defenders' resolve never wavered. As the mercenaries pushed deeper into the outpost, Marcus and Vishari worked together to outmaneuver them, turning the tide of the fight. Chapter 3. The Battle for Redemption. The dawn was swallowed by chaos as plasma bolts streaked across the sky, illuminating the battered walls of the Ardent Horizon outpost. Marcus Hayes crouched behind a makeshift barricade, his rifle aimed at the advancing mercenaries. Each shot he fired was calculated, a reminder of his years of military training. But even his precision couldn't mask the overwhelming odds they faced. Behind him, in the safety of the command center, Vishari coordinated the defense with the calm authority of the warrior she once was. Her voice crackled through the comms, directing the ragtag group of refugees who had chosen to stand and fight. "Marcus, pull back to Sector 3, she said. "We've got movement on the north side." "Copy that," Marcus replied, motioning for the others to retreat. As they moved, a plasma bolt scorched the ground inches from his feet, forcing him to dive for cover. "Damn it," he muttered, reloading his rifle. A desperate gamble. The mercenaries were relentless, their ranks bolstered by combat droids and heavily armed shock troopers. The refugees fought valiantly, using every ounce of courage and desperation to hold the line, but their defenses were crumbling. In the command center, Vishari gritted her teeth. Her violet eyes flicked between the tactical map and the live feeds from the battlefield. "We're losing ground," she muttered. One of the refugees, a young Osirian engineer, turned to her. "If we don't do something soon, they'll breach the inner perimeter." Vishari's gaze hardened. "Then we make our stand here. No one gets past this point." "But how?" the Osirian asked. "We're outnumbered." Vishari glanced at the power cell connected to her wheelchair. A risky idea began to form in her mind. Secrets revealed. Meanwhile, Marcus led a small group of fighters in a desperate counterattack. As they pushed back the mercenaries, he spotted their leader, the towering Zorathian who had delivered the bounty notice. The mercenaries stood at the rear of the formation, barking orders and scanning the battlefield. Marcus's blood boiled. He signaled for his team to cover him as he moved closer, weaving through the chaos. When he was within range, he raised his rifle and fired. The shot struck the Zorathian's shoulder, knocking him back. The mercenary growled, clutching his wound. "Persistent little human," he sneered. Marcus didn't lower his weapon. "Why are you after her? What's the real story?" The Zorathian laughed, his metallic implants glinting in the dim light. "You think this is about money? That warrior you're protecting, she knows things. Secrets her people would kill to keep buried." "What kind of secrets?" Marcus demanded. The mercenary smirked. "Ask her yourself. If you live long enough." Before Marcus could press further, the mercenary activated a device on his wrist, summoning reinforcements. Marcus cursed under his breath and retreated, the Zorathian's words echoing in his mind. Vishari's plan. Back at the command center, Vishari was preparing for her next move. She had rigged the power cell of her wheelchair into a makeshift energy bomb, its volatile charge capable of creating a massive explosion. It was a desperate gambit, but one she knew could turn the tide of the battle. When Marcus burst into the room, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, he immediately noticed the device. "What the hell is that?" Vishari met his gaze, her expression resolute. "Our last chance." Marcus's eyes widened. "You can't be serious. You're not thinking of Dash." "It's the only way," Vishari interrupted. "If we can lure them into the central corridor, I can detonate the charge and take them out." "And what happens to you?" Marcus asked, his voice rising. "You don't walk away from something like that." Vishari's expression softened, a faint smile tugging at her lips. I'm not walking away from this, Marcus. I haven't walked in years. That's not funny, he snapped, his fists clenched. There has to be another way. There isn't, Vishari said firmly. This is my fight. My chance to make things right. Marcus shook his head. No. You don't get to throw your life away because of what your people did to you. You're worth more than that. For a moment, Vishari's stoic facade cracked, and Marcus saw the pain behind her eyes. I've been running from my past for so long, Marcus. Maybe it's time I stop. The final stand. Despite Marcus's protests, Vishari's plan was set into motion. She directed the remaining fighters to lure the mercenaries into the central corridor, where the energy bomb would be detonated. Marcus stayed by her side, refusing to leave her alone. As the mercenaries advanced, the defenders fell back, drawing their enemies into the trap. Plasma bolts lit up the corridor, and the sound of battle reverberated through the outpost. Vishari gripped the detonation trigger tightly, her violet eyes fixed on the approaching enemy. When I give the signal, fall back, she told Marcus. I'm not leaving you, he said firmly. Marcus dash. No, he interrupted, his voice resolute. If you're going down, I'm going down with you. And Vishari stared at him, her expression softening. You're an idiot. So I've been told. A choice made. As the mercenaries closed in, Vishari prepared to activate the bomb. But before she could, Marcus grabbed her hand, his gaze intense. Wait. What are you doing? She asked. You've got nothing to prove, Marcus said. Not to them. Not to me. We can still get out of this. Vishari hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. For the first time, she considered the possibility of survival not for herself, but for the people who had come to depend on her. Reluctantly, she nodded. All right, let's finish this together. Marcus activated the bomb remotely, triggering a controlled detonation that destroyed the corridor and the mercenaries within it. The blast shook the outpost, but the defenders held their ground. When the dust settled, the remaining mercenaries retreated, their leader cursing as he fled. Aftermath. The battle was over, but the cost was high. The outpost was in ruins, and many had been lost. Yet, for the first time, Vishari felt a sense of peace. She had stood her ground, not as a broken warrior, but as a leader. As the survivors began to rebuild, Marcus sat beside Vishari, their bond stronger than ever. You saved them, he said. You saved all of us. Vishari smiled faintly. Not alone. Marcus reached for her hand, his voice quiet. What now? She looked out at the horizon, her violet eyes shining with determination. We keep fighting. Together. Chapter 4. Rebuilding Trust, Forging Futures. The aftermath of the battle left the ardent horizon outpost a shell of its former self. Smoke still rose from the shattered corridors, and the ground was littered with scorched debris. Survivors moved quietly through the rubble, their expressions grim but determined. Despite the destruction, there was a sense of victory in the air. They had faced an overwhelming enemy and won. Marcus Hayes stood at the edge of the command center, surveying the work being done to rebuild. His body ached, his uniform tattered, but his mind was focused. Beside him, Vishari sat in her wheelchair, her violet eyes scanning the ruins. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a quiet strength in her posture. Not bad for a bunch of refugees, Marcus said, breaking the silence. Vishari gave a faint smile. We survived. That's more than I expected. More than they expected, too, Marcus said, nodding toward the retreating figures of the mercenaries on the horizon. I don't think they'll be coming back anytime soon. Vishari's smile faded. They won't stop. Not until they're sure I'm dead. Marcus leaned against the railing, his tone serious. Then we'll make sure they don't get the chance. A new role. The survivors had started to gather in the central courtyard, their makeshift council forming to discuss the next steps. Despite their weariness, there was a sense of unity among them, something Marcus hadn't seen before. He and Vishari were called to speak, their leadership during the battle now recognized by all. An older Osirian, one of the senior refugees, stood to address the group. We owe our lives to Captain Hayes and Vishari. Without them, this outpost would have fallen. There were murmurs of agreement, and several refugees nodded. Marcus shifted uncomfortably under the attention, but Vishari remained composed. We fought because we had no choice, Vishari said, her voice calm but firm. But survival isn't enough. If we're going to make this place a home, we need to work together. The Osirian nodded. And we'll need leaders to guide us. You've both proven yourselves, perhaps you would consider taking on that role. Marcus raised his hands. Hold on, I'm just a soldier. I'm not exactly cut out for leadership. You already are one, Vishari said, her gaze steady, whether you admit it or not. The group murmured again, their agreement evident. Marcus sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Fine, but only if she's in charge too. Vishari blinked, clearly surprised. Me? You're the only one who knows what it takes to survive, Marcus said. They need you, Vishari. We need you. She hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. Then, with a deep breath, she nodded. All right, but this isn't just about me or you. This is about all of us. The crowd erupted into quiet applause, their approval clear. For the first time in years, the outpost had hope. Confronting the past. That evening, Marcus and Vishari sat by the edge of the outpost, watching the twin moons rise over the horizon. The air was cool, the silence broken only by the distant sounds of rebuilding. You didn't have to do that, Vishari said, her tone softer than usual. Do what? Marcus asked. Put yourself on the line for me. Not just in the fight but afterward, with the council. Marcus shrugged. I meant what I said. You're the reason we're still here. Vishari looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the scars on her palms. It's strange. For so long, I believed I had no purpose. That my life ended the day I lost the use of my legs. But it didn't, Marcus said. And it never will, as long as you keep fighting. She glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. You're annoyingly optimistic, you know that? Comes with the job, Marcus said with a grin. Besides, I think you're starting to like it. Vishari chuckled softly, the sound surprising even her. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. A shadow on the horizon. As the days turned into weeks, the outpost began to transform. Walls were rebuilt, defenses reinforced, and the refugees found new roles within their community. Under the joint leadership of Marcus and Vishari, the once divided population started to work together, creating a place they could call home. But the shadow of the mercenaries and the bounty on Vishari's head still loomed over them. Marcus knew it was only a matter of time before the Praxis or another faction came looking. One evening, while reviewing the outpost defenses, Marcus noticed Vishari staring at the horizon. Her expression was tense, her gaze fixed on something he couldn't see. And what is it? He asked, approaching her. They'll come back, she said quietly. It's only a matter of time. Then we'll be ready, Marcus said. Vishari shook her head. This isn't just about me anymore. If they come, they'll destroy everything we've built. Marcus frowned, sensing the unspoken message behind her words. You're not thinking about leaving, are you? I have to, Vishari said. If I stay, I'll only bring more danger to these people. Marcus grabbed her hand, his grip firm. We didn't fight for you just to watch you walk or roll away. Vishari met his gaze, her violet eyes filled with emotion. And I didn't ask you to fight for me, Marcus. But I can't let my past destroy your future. A new beginning. Despite her protests, Vishari stayed. Together, she and Marcus began preparing the outpost for the inevitable challenges ahead. They trained the refugees in combat, fortified the defenses, and even sent scouts to nearby settlements to forge alliances. The outpost was no longer just a refuge, was becoming a force to be reckoned with. As the months passed, Marcus and Vishari grew closer. Their shared experiences had forged an unbreakable bond, one built on mutual respect and trust. They still argued. Of course, Vishari's stubbornness clashed with Marcus's impulsiveness, but their differences only strengthened their partnership. One night, as they stood on the walls of the outpost, Marcus glanced at Vishari. You know, I never thought I'd end up here, leading a bunch of misfits on the edge of the galaxy. Vishari smiled faintly. And I never thought I'd find a reason to keep going. Well, I guess we're both full of surprises, Marcus said. She looked at him, her expression softening. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his smile genuine. We've got a long road ahead, Vishari, but we'll face it together. As the stars stretched across the sky, the outpost stood as a beacon of hope in the desolate expanse of space. And for the first time in years, both Marcus and Vishari felt like they had found a place where they truly belonged.